Globalization. In the previous discussion, we have established the many definitions of and issues in defining globalization and the metaphors that we can use to understand easily the concept. We have also looked into its origins and history. So at this point, we will analyze globalization culturally, economically, and politically. And from these theories, we can also see globalization as a process that increases either homogeneity or heterogeneity. Homogeneity refers to the increasing sameness in the world as cultural inputs, economic factors, and political orientations of societies expand to create common practices, same economies, and similar forms of government. Homogeneity in culture is often linked to cultural imperialism. This means a given culture influences other culture. For an instance, the dominant religion in our country is Christianity, which was brought to us by the Spaniards in the year 1521. Another example is the Koreanization or the proliferation of Korean culture, such as K-drama, the K-pop, and the dance, which influences so much the youth of today. In economic terms, there is recognition of the spreading of neoliberalism, capitalism, and the market economy in the world. The global economic crisis are also products of homogeneity in economic globalization. In the end, rich countries become advantageous in the world economy at the expense of the poor countries, which leads to increased inequality among the nations. The political realm also suffers homogenization if one takes into account the emerging similar models of governance in the world, which means one political orientation is growing in today's society. The global flow of media is often characterized as media imperialism. The television, the music, the books, and movies are perceived as imposed on developing countries by the West. Media imperialism undermines the existence of alternative global media originating from developing countries such as the Al Jazeera and the Bollywood, as well as the influence of local and regional media. The internet can be seen as an arena for alternative media. Cultural imperialism denies the agency of viewers, but people around the world often interpret the same medium. Example is movie, but in significantly different way. Global media are dominated by a small number of large corporations. As Mac Chisney in 1999 put it, this is being extended from the old media to the new media, such as the Microsoft, the Facebook, Twitter, Google, and Apple iTunes. As a result, in the long run, the internet could end up being less diverse and competitive. The independent media center associated with the alter globalization movement helps to counter this trend. It disseminates information to facilitate global participation of activists. Hacktivists extend activism to the internet by hacking into computer programs to promote a particular cause. Ritzer in 2008 claimed that in general, the contemporary world is undergoing the process of McDonaldization. It is the process by which Western societies are dominated by the principle of fast food restaurants. McDonaldization involves the global spread of rational systems such as efficiency, calculability, predictability, and control. Ritzer in 2008 pointed out that this process is extended to other businesses, sectors, and geographical areas. Globalization, in contrast with glocalization, is a process wherein nations, corporations, etc., impose themselves on geographical areas in order to gain profits, power, and so on. Ritzer in 2007 also espoused the idea that globalization can also be seen as a flow of nothing as opposed to something, involving the spread of non-places, non-things, non-people, and non-services. On the other hand, Heterogeneity pertains to the creation of various cultural practices, new economies, and political groups because of the interaction of elements from different societies in the world. Heterogeneity refers to the differences because of either lasting differences or of hybrid or combination of cultures that can be produced through different transplanetary processes. Contrary to cultural imperialism, heterogeneity in culture is associated with cultural hybridization, a more specific concept of globalization contained by Roland Robertson in 1992. To him, as global forces interact with the local factors or a specific geographical area, the glocal is being produced. Economic issues are not exempted from heterogeneity. The commodification of cultures and local markets are examples of differentiation happening in many economies around the world. The same goes with political institutions. Barber in 1995 also provided the alternative of Macworld, the jihad. As Ritzer in 2008 mentioned, it refers to the political groups that are engaged in an intensification of nationalism and that leads to a greater political heterogeneity throughout the world. Although homogeneity and heterogeneity gives us idea about the effects of globalization, the picture is not yet complete. The theories about globalization will be clarified as we look closer at each of them as we go on with our next discussions. Globalization is reshaping how we have traditionally gone about studying the social world, and the human culture as a field of globalization studies is now emerging across the disciplines. At this point, we will now proceed to the specific theories of globalization. The first one is the world systems theory. The world system theory is a macro-sociological perspective that explains the dynamics of the capitalist world economy as a total social system. Its first major articulation and classic example of this approach is associated with Immanuel Wallerstein in 1974. For Wallerstein, a world system is a social system, one that has boundaries, structures, member groups, rules of legitimation, and coherence. Its life is made up of conflicting forces which hold it together by tension and tear it apart as each group seeks eternally to remold it as its advantage. It has characteristics of an organism in that it has lifespan over which its characteristics change in some respect and remain stable in others. Life within it is largely self-contained, and the dynamics of its development are largely internal. A world system is what Wallerstein termed a world economy, integrated through the market rather than a political center, in which two or more regions are interdependent with respect to necessities like food, fuel, protection, and two or more polities compete for domination without the emergence of one single center forever. In addition, Wallerstein said that a world system is a multicultural territorial division of labor in which the production and exchange of basic goods and raw materials is necessary for everyday life of inhabitants. The division of labor here refers to the forces and relations of production of the world economy as a whole, and it leads to the existence of two independent regions, the core and the periphery. These are geographical and culturally different, one focusing on labor intensive and the other is on the capital intensive production. The core periphery relationship is structural. Semi-peripheral states act as a buffer zone between core and periphery and has a mix of kinds of activities and institutions that exist on them. Among the most important structures of the current world system is a power hierarchy between the core and periphery. in which powerful and wealthy, or the core, societies dominate and exploit weak and poor peripheral societies. Technology is a central factor in the positioning of region or of a region in the core or periphery. Peripheral countries are structurally constrained to experience a kind of development that produces their subordinate status. The different strengths of the multiple state within the system is crucial to maintain the system as a whole, because strong states reinforce and increase the differential flow of surplus to the core zone. This is what Wallerstein called unequal exchange, the systematic transfer of surplus from semi-proletariat sector in the peripheral to the high technology industrialized core. This leads to a process of capital accumulation at a global scale and necessarily involves the appropriation and transportation of peripheral surplus. On the political side of the world system, a few concepts deemed highlighting. For Wallerstein, nation states are variables, elements within the system. States are used by class forces to pursue their interest. In the case of the core countries, imperialism refers to the domination of weak peripheral regions by strong core states, and hegemony refers to the existence of one core state temporarily outstripping the rest. Hegemonic power maintain a stable balance of power and enforce free trade as long as it is to their advantage. However, hegemony is temporary due to class struggles and the diffusion of technical advantages. And finally, there is what we call global class struggle. This class struggle was first used by Karl Marx in his book, The Communist Manifesto. The second theory of globalization is modernization theory. Modernization theory is a description and explanation of the processes of transformation from traditional or underdeveloped societies to modern societies. In the words of one of the major proponents, historically, modernization is the process of changing towards those types of social, economic, and political system that have developed in Western Europe and North America from the 17th century to the 19th century and have then spread to other European countries and in the 19th and 20th century to the South America, Asia, and African continents. Modernization theory has been one of the major perspectives in understanding globalization and in the sociology of national development and underdevelopment since the 1950s. Primary attention has focused on ways in which past and present pre-modern societies become modern or become westernized through processes of economic growth and change in social, political, and cultural structures. Modernization theory is used to explain the process of modernization within societies. Modernization refers to a model of a progressive transition from a pre-modern or traditional to a modern society. Modernization theory originates from the ideas of German sociologist Max Weber, which provided the basis for the modernization paradigm developed by Harvard sociologist Talcott Parsons. So the theory looks at the internal factors of a country while assuming that with assistance of or the traditional countries can be brought to development in the same manner more developed countries have been. So modernization theory was a dominant paradigm in the social sciences in the 1950s and the 1960s that went into a deep eclipse. But it made comeback after 1991 but remained a controversial model. Modernization theory both attempts to identify the social variables that contribute to social progress and development of societies and seeks to explain the process of social evolution. This theory also is subject to criticisms originating from the socialist and free market ideologies such as the world systems theory, globalization theories, and dependency theories, among others. Modernization theory stresses not only the process of change but also the responses to that change. It also looked at internal dynamics while referring to social and cultural structures and adapting to new technologies. The third theory of globalization is the evolutionary theory or evolution theory of globalization. It is an evolutionary or historical materialist approach to the study of long-term historical change. It explains, in evolutionary terms, the rise and fall of ancient empires, the emergence of contemporary global village, and our inevitable maturation into a world state. The idea of it stretches back to antiquity, but this new field has made great breakthroughs in the last few decades. Basically, these are the three major theories of globalization. But there are also other theories that we can discuss in another video apart from this podcast. The video will talk about different theories aside from the mentioned, such as the theory of liberalism, the theory of political realism, the theory of Marxism, the theory of constructivism, the theory of postmodernism, the theory of feminism, the theory of transformationalism, and the theory of eclecticism. Those will be discussed in another video. Let us now discuss the dynamics of local and global culture. Global flows of culture tend to move more easily around the globe than ever before, especially through non-material digital forms. There are three perspectives on global cultural flows. These are differentialism, hybridization, and convergence. Cultural differentialism emphasized the fact that cultures are essentially different and are only superficially affected by global flows. The interaction of cultures is deemed to contain the potential or catastrophic collusion. Samuel Huntington's theory on the clash of the civilization proposed in 1996 best exemplifies this approach. According to Huntington, after the Cold War, political economic differences were overshadowed by new fault lines, which were primarily cultural in nature. The increasing interaction among different civilizations, such as the Sunni, Islamic, Orthodox, and the West, would lead to intense clashes, especially the economic conflict between the Western and Sunni civilization and blood politic conflict between the Western and Islamic civilization. This theory has been critiqued for a number of reasons, especially on its portrayal of Muslims as being prone to violence. The next term is cultural hybridization. The cultural hybridization approach emphasizes the integration of local and global cultures. Globalization is considered to be a creative process which gives rise to hybrid entities that are not reducible to either global or local. A key concept is glocalization, or the interpenetration of global and local, resulting in unique outcomes in different geographical areas. Another key concept is by Arjun Appadurei's Escapes in 1996, where global flows involve people, technology, finance, political images, and media, and the disjunctures between them, which leads to the creation of cultural hybrids. And the next term that we need to define is the cultural convergence. Cultural convergence approach stresses homogeneity introduced by globalization. Cultures are deemed to be radically altered by strong flows, while cultural imperialism happens when one culture imposes itself on and tend to destroy at least parts of another culture. One important critic of cultural imperialism is John Tomlinson's idea of deterritorialization of culture. Deterritorialization means that it is much more difficult to tie culture to a specific geographical point of origin.